Hello and welcome to the web series ZeroPM Pieces. My name is Sarah Hale and I'm the project coordinator of a really exciting new research project called ZeroPM. In the ZeroPM Pieces, the researchers in the project will tell you about one piece of the ZeroPM puzzle that they're working on. So without further ado, here comes a ZeroPM piece.
Good morning, and thank you very much, Sarah, for that presentation. I'm proud to be here today to present the SINlist, which is one of our most important projects, and which is also the project behind why we got involved in PM substances from the start, and got to know many of the people behind this amazing project, ZeroPM. And so I will talk about the SINlist today, which is a globally recognized database of hazardous substances, and I will walk you through this more in detail very soon. So my name is Anna Lennquist, and I am the project manager of work package 4 in the ZeroPM project. And this is part of the prevention section, which is about preventing PM substances from entering the environment in the first place. And our part of the project market transition is about enabling and encouraging companies and industries to move away from these substances in the first place, so that we prevent that they end up in products and finally in the environment. And we will do this through different tools that we have already and some tools that we will develop. So ChemSEC, we are an environmental NGO aiming to reduce the use of hazardous substances. So we work only with the chemical issue. We're based in Sweden, and we receive funding from the Swedish governments and from various charity funds. So what we do is that we drive the political discussion on hazardous chemicals, and we also challenge companies to improve their chemicals management. We develop online tools that help companies switch to safer chemicals, and we also inform investors about the risks and opportunities of the chemical industry in the light of production of hazardous chemicals. Much of what we do at ChemSEC originates from discussions we've had with this group, the ChemSEC business group. As you see, it's a number of multinational main brands and downstream users of chemicals from various sectors. And we meet once a year often. Sorry about that. And in between, we discuss a lot of different issues connected to policies and chemicals management, because we can learn a lot from these companies when we create our tools to aid companies in chemicals management. And they also learn a lot from each other, because they don't usually meet, as they are from such different sectors. And also from us in terms of upcoming policies. And so we have a really nice exchange, no money involved there, so just a mutual discussion group, I could say. So what happened in 2006 was that the European Chemicals Regulation, REACH, went into force. And it had the idea and the concept of listing substances of very high concern on a so-called candidate list as a first step towards regulation. But as the system works, it requires that a member state suggests or proposes a chemical for the candidate list, and then all member states have to agree. So the process is very slow, and it took a few years from 2006 until this process even started. So when REACH was in place, no chemicals on the candidate list, the companies in the ChemSEC business group asked us, what substances do you think will be on the REACH candidate list? And that is the exercise that led to the development of our SINlist. So SIN is an abbreviation standing for Substitute It Now, meaning that if you are prepared and phase out these substances now, you will not be caught by regulation later, and you will have more time to make a good substitution. We launched it first in 2008 and have updated it a number of times since. So it's our prediction of the REACH candidate list. And therefore, we also have the scope of the REACH candidate list, which means that we do not have, for example, pesticides and pharmaceuticals on the SINlist, but it's about industrial chemicals. So the candidate list have different categories of chemicals that can be identified as substances of very high concern. And we use the same categories for the SINlist. So first, we have CMRs, carcinogens, mutagens, and reprotoxic chemicals. And for those, there is an official classification in place, and the criteria are corresponding to the SVHC criteria. So here we have actually just added officially classified CMRs fulfilling the scope of the REACH authorization and added those to the SINlist. And that is probably about 80% of the SINlist, which was relatively easy for us and also is very non-controversial in the sense that everyone already agrees that those are problematic. Still, they are not on the candidate list in most cases. And the second category is PBTs, vPvBs, persistent bioaccumulative and toxic, or very persistent, very bioaccumulative substances. For those, there are criteria in REACH. And when we have added those to the SINlist, we have used the same criteria and we have asked scientific consultants to evaluate chemicals against those criteria based on all available information. And in our case, that has been Martin Scheringer, a professor at ETH in Zurich, that has made those evaluations for us 2 times. And then we have a special category under the candidate list and under substances of very high concern, which is called equivalent level of concern. And that is in place to be a sort of safety net that includes chemicals that are not CMRs and not PBTs, but that are of equivalent level of concern. And the most obvious example has been EDCs so far, so endocrine disrupting chemicals. So there are no criteria yet in place for EDCs, but instead we have had, again, expert consultants, in this case, the endocrine disruption exchange scientists, to evaluate a number of chemicals for us, gather all evidence supporting that they are endocrine disruptors, and let our decision be guided by the WHO definition that was in place at the time. And it is also in this category, until we have criteria of PMTs in place in regulation, they have to be added sort of under this category as equivalent level of concern. And this is what we have done for the SINlist, but we have been using the criteria proposed by UBA and NGI, and that has been very valuable for us. So we have been able to work the same way as we did with PBTs and the vPvBs, so having scientists evaluate the number of substances against both criteria and then placing them on the SINlist. So since the launch in 2008, where we added about 300 substances of all these different categories, we have had a number of updates where we have focused on a specific type of chemicals or problems. So in 2011, we added the first EDCs, and this was very much appreciated because at that time, EDCs were discussed, companies were asked to replace them, but there was no official list or criteria in place that could help companies understand concretely what substances are we talking about. And that was a gap that the SINlist could fulfill. In 2014, we had a focus on what we call regrettable substitution. And the meaning of that is that often well-known hazardous chemicals are being replaced with less well-known but still equally problematic chemicals. And that's a pattern that has been seen through history and that we need to avoid in the future. So at this time, we added, for example, bisphenol F and bisphenol S that have been used to replace bisphenol A. We added a number of brominated flame retardants that have been replacing the more old and well-known ones, and so forth. In 2019, we added the first PMT substances to the SINlist, and the ones that we have not added any since. And we also added PBTs and carbon nanotubes, and a bit of theme around this update was then persistence. And the last years, we've had 62,000 unique visitors to the SINlist from 182 countries, so it really has a global spread. So why did we add PMT chemicals to the SINlist? Well, first of all, we saw that it's very urgent to act on these substances. They are everywhere, they're polluting our water, and there is not yet any regulatory measures to really capture them. And luckily, regulation is to be expected. And as the purpose of the SINlist is to predict regulation, it was obvious that this was an important category to capture and to show companies concretely, if we talk about PMT substances, which are there. And we also wanted to support the great initiative by UBA to highlight these chemicals. And therefore, we did this launch in November 2019. So how we did this? There was a list in place from UBA listing a few hundred possible PMTs. We screened those and selected the ones that had the most evidence and that were most likely to be PMTs. We also looked through that they seemed to have a relevant use for the REACH regulation and that they were used, that they were not just some laboratory product that nobody ever seen. And then we looked into this subset of chemicals, gathered all experimental data, all biomonitoring data, and then our scientist consultants, again, Professor Martin Scheringer, used a lot of different data models to estimate properties. In this evaluation, we also considered degradation products and read across to similar substances. So in the end, we had quite a lot of information about each chemical, and we had intense discussions with different experts of which of these were the most likely or had the most evidence of being PMTs or vPvMs, and we added those to the SINlist. And this is the results, 16 PMT chemicals that we added in 2019. Some of those have been more discussed afterwards and are more well-known. We have trifluoroacetic acid, which is very abundant in the environment, and the same goes for melamine, which is found very often. We have PFBS, PFAS substance, and also one for dioxide that have later made it to the candidate list, which is very good. So looking at who uses the SINlist, we have 62,000 users, as I said, from 182 countries. And in the beginning, we were very surprised that there was such a big interest also from outside of Europe. It's really a globally used list. And when we look at these sort of IP addresses from the users and the registered users, we see all big chemical manufacturers there. We also see very many companies. We see authorities from different countries, both in the EU and beyond. Eco-labels and certifications, some of them use the SINlist as part of their criteria. Financial investors look at the SINlist to understand what SINlist chemical producers are producing so that they can make an informed investment and not investing in a company very dependent on a substance likely to be banned in the future. Public procurers, especially in the Nordic countries, use the SINlist when they make public procurement. So it's often part of the public procurement criteria. And now I'm going to show you a small film illustrating what the SINlist is about.
You know, we were a group of happy chemicals going out for a quick bite and a beer after work.
And then we met this funny solvent chemical Cara at the pub.
She bought everybody shots, and then her and Mildred had this funny dance. It was enjoyable.
We didn't want the night to end, so we all went to the product, and that's when...
Are you on the list?
What list would that be, sir?
That would be the SINlist. A pretty complete list, really, of chemicals that we wouldn't allow into the product.
Oh, no, sir. We're all good chemicals.
Good to hear. And her?
Cara?
I'm Cara.
I'd very much like to know your full name, miss.
Yes. Cara, carbon, tetrachloride.
Tetrachloride.
He was really polite and just going about his job.
I'm sorry to say that you're on the list.
Are you kidding me?
I'm afraid not.
That's a lot of bullshit.
It says that you are harmful to fish and possibly carcinogenic.
Wow. That's just perfect. Perfect, huh? I'm leaving. Man.
Why don't you try the plastic duck down the road? I'm sure they'll be happy to let you in.
I think it was the right decision not to let her into the product.
Cara seems like a great gal. There's no arguing that. It's just the fact that she may cause cancer. Yeah, and yeah, that will probably affect my opinion of her.
So thank you for listening, and now I'd be happy to take questions. You can follow the work we do on our different channels. So go in and read more about ChemSEC, and let's have a discussion. Thank you very much.
ZeroPM, Zero Pollution of Persistent and Mobile Substances. This project has received funding from the European Union's Horizon 2020 Research and Innovation Programme under Grant Agreement number 101036756.